Hello, my friends. My name is Ryan Freeman. Welcome to my life. Today I wanted to talk about 3 different types of selfishness. According to William James was the great American psychologist who was prominent in the latter half of the 19th century. In 1890, he came out with The Principles of Psychology in 2 volumes. I have it here in 1 volume. It is small print, so very thick tome, roughly equivalent to Tolstoy's War and Peace in length. I'm not going to talk about the whole book. I'll save other parts of it for another day. It is a fascinating look at human psychology. There is a reason that William James is so well regarded, even today, by modern psychologists. I wanted to talk about his 3 versions of self and their various manifestations of selfishness. I think selfishness is a word that we all know. We all know what it looks like. But there's a couple subtle versions of selfishness that you might not be familiar with. And when I read it, I thought, holy crap, he's right. That is selfishness. And I would have never guessed it. This is one of the reasons I really like reading psychologists, is because their insight into our behavior when they're really great at their work is very useful to know. And you wouldn't normally pick that up just from the people around you. So anyways, first I want to talk about what do we mean when we say ourself, myself. William James differentiates ourselves into 3 different layers. We have our material layer, where we're talking about our body and our clothes, and the things that we own, even including our houses and our wives and wife. You should only have one wife, right? Unless you're a polygamist, then that's okay. And your children. These are our material selves, the things that we can touch, the things that we can feel. This is ourselves. And when we lose part of ourself, if I lost my hand, I would feel bad. If my wife got injured by someone, I would feel angry. Our material selves. Then there is our social self. Our social self is the regard that others have for us. So that may be our reputation at our workplace, our reputation at the gym, how people think of us in our neighborhood, in our community, what our wife thinks about us. William James mentions is what our spouse, wife or husband, thinks of us is usually one of the most important parts of ourselves. And if our wife's image of us is lowered, then we feel almost worse than having our hand cut off. And I'll attest to that as a married man. That is actually true. And when our wife or spouse really has a high estimation of us, then we feel very great, right? So our material self, which is the actual physical parts of our body, as well as our possessions, as well as the people that we intimately almost think of as ourselves. I mean, we feel pain when we lose them. Then our social self, which is that reputation that others have, right? If I currently have a reputation of being the baddest guy in the gym who lifts the most weights and everyone thinks of me as the strong guy, I feel good. My self-importance or my self-esteem is higher than if I did not have that regard, or if they did not have that regard for me in their head. But let's say I come into the gym and I act a fool and I do something inappropriate, and their regard for me, the other people in the gym, is lowered, then suddenly my self-esteem might be lowered as well, because it wasn't that I actually lost the body part, no damage, I didn't lose any property, but my social self suffered. So we can have a material self that suffers and a social self that suffers. And then the 3rd version of self is the spiritual self. And the spiritual self is your mental being, for lack of a better word. So your intelligence or your intellectual faculties, your feelings, as well as your moral self, your sense of yourself. How moral are you? How intelligent are you? How discerning are you? How acute are you? Your intellectual powers, your mental powers, as well as your feelings and psychological differentiation, if that doesn't sound too abstract. So your spiritual self is almost your internal stream of consciousness and all its various constituent parts. And if you suffer a blow in that, if you suddenly lose your faculty to eloquently speak in front of a camera like I am stumbling right now, then you start, even though perhaps your reputation hasn't even suffered any loss if others don't hear this video, and perhaps you haven't suffered any material loss, but you start to dread the loss of your mental faculties, your emotional abilities, your moral sense, your sense of rightness with God or the universe or with your soul. That wasn't the clearest example, but I think you understand. So think, I hope you do. So think of the three selves of William James's sort of typology of the self as at the bottom, and he describes it as sort of a pyramid. At the bottom is our material self, though that is our body, are the people that we intimately think of as part of ourself, like our family, as well as our clothes, material possessions, your cars, your houses, right? Your house burns down and you feel a loss of self. Then you've got your social self, and that is your social standing, whether it is in your church, your business, your community, whatever. And then your spiritual self, your soul, maybe not your soul, I shouldn't say, but your mental faculties, your ability to reason, your ability to feel, your ability to, your almost your mental power, for lack of a better word. You could tell I haven't completely wrapped my head around this 100%, but that's one of the reasons I'm trying to describe it here with you, is to help me to put it into words, okay, and sharpen up that spiritual self of mine. All right, so now, what are the three versions of selfishness? Well, let's just say that it's pretty obvious for the material self to be selfish. This is a person who takes the biggest donut, the person who grabs the seat by the fire, or the person who decides to not give up their seat on a crowded bus or a crowded train for an elderly person. We say that's a selfish person. I think that is the classical way that we think of selfishness. Now, what is the social version of selfishness? Well, the social version of selfishness, so where you're not trying to please your material self, you're not trying to please your spiritual self, but you're trying to enhance your social self, so your image in the eyes of others. That's where you do something to do that, right? So it can almost, in what William James gives an example, he gives an example of altruistic actions which others observe as being a method of social selfishness. So let's say I go out in my neighborhood and I walk around handing out money to people. Well, I'm losing part of my material self. I'm losing my money. People say he is very generous. Some people are going to say I'm crazy. But am I really just altruistic, just giving away my money? Just philanthropy? Well, kinda, but kinda not, right? Because everyone now thinks of me as this great philanthropist, this great generous guy. So my image in people's heads has been enhanced. Think of Bill Gates. And I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to cast moral judgments. This is just looking at selfishness through the lens of William James. Bill Gates is known as a great philanthropist who does a lot of good deeds around the world. And yes, he's given away a lot of his material possessions and given away a lot of his time and all that, but he has enhanced his image in the eyes of the world. So although he has lost a little bit of money, and maybe he hasn't. I think I've read an article overall that a lot of philanthropists actually gain money because it enhances their image, which enhances their brand and whatnot. But that's another topic. What Bill Gates gains is his image. People respect him. The people love him. People think of him as a good guy. So he gains in his social self what he might potentially lose from his material self. And that is an act of selfishness because you're trying to better yourself. It's not your material self, which we normally think of as selfishness. The guy who grabs the blanket when there's only one blanket and it's a cold night. The woman who takes all of the ketchup packets, leaving you with none, and you have nothing to dip your fries. And we think of that as selfishness. That's the very material manifestation of selfishness. But we don't think about the social selfishness. This is where you're trying to enhance your social self-seeking, social self-seeking. And then the spiritual selfishness, that is where you basically don't give a crap about the material or the social. You could let other people could burn, but you are going to focus on saving your soul or delighting in the pleasures of the mind. So that is a spiritual selfishness. So let's just wrap it up with sort of an analogy or an example. Let's say that 3 people were invited to a party, and person A, the selfish material self, he grabs the most comfortable chair in the room. He takes more food than is his due. He drinks and gets drunk, belches, doesn't care about his farts, doesn't care about other people smelling his farts. That is the most typical image of hoggishness, is one of the words that William James uses to describe this behavior. And that is a great example of material selfishness. Now, the social selfish person is the person who helps the older woman to the table, who does all sorts of kind, altruistic acts in a noticeable way that it looks like this person is selfless, but in fact what they're doing is enhancing your image of them as a virtuous person, which makes themselves, even though they've dedicated a little bit of their time and energy to helping others, they feel really good about themselves now because other people think they're a great person. So this is kind of an interesting way of thinking how some quote-unquote altruistic people are actually doing it out of selfish reasons because they want to feel better about themselves, their social self, that is. And then the spiritual person who gets the selfish spiritual person who gets invited to the party doesn't even go. They go camping in the woods, ignore all the messages. They don't give a damn about the party. The only thing they care about is saving their soul. That's the selfish spiritual person. And we think of that person as a holy person, but actually they're selfish. They just care about their soul, their spirit. Okay. I don't know if any of that made sense. Put your comments down below. I haven't actually finished reading this, but I found that to be a very fascinating section, and I wanted to talk about it and share it with you guys. Are you selfish materially, socially, or spiritually, or all 3? I know I am guilty of all 3. Thank you very much for watching this video. My name is Ryan.